Go. Okay, we are learning Leila Nishmas Mindel, Mariam Bas Kalman Ruvain, Nishma Shabbat Aliyah. We are at Mem Beis Amud Aleph Aval Nosein. So it's by the two dots, and if you're following on the article, it is 42A1, and it is the final paragraphs. Okay, Aval Nosein. So the Mishnah we had a Mishnah which spoke of mixing hot water, cold water. That's what we've been discussing today. We're basically the primary discussion is going to be klisheni, but really the general discussion over here is going to be about mixing hot water and cold water. Okay, bottom line is you want some water to warm yourself up, right? Is that normal, right? Basically, a person wants to use some water on Shabbos, and they have, let's say, a kettle, which has their hot water, an urn that has their hot water, and they don't want to just take hot water from there. They want to have water that is going to be a mix. They want warm water. The question is, what are you allowed to do? What are you not allowed to do? That's going to be our discussion today. Walk away with some practical halacha about what you are allowed to do in terms of mixing hot water and cold water on Shabbos. Okay, so another example would be you made a tea and the tea is too hot. All right, so you're a teenager, a kid, whatever. They want to cool off the tea. What are you allowed to do? What are you allowed to mix? What are you not allowed to mix? That's going to be our discussion. Okay, so aval nosein, a person is. So let's see. Tan Rabbanan, we have a brisa. Nosein adam chamin leso chatzonin. A person's allowed to put hot water into cold water. Okay, v'lo hatzonin leso chachamin. But you're not allowed to put cold water into hot water. Divrei Beis Shammai. These are the words of Beis Shammai. So what's the premise behind Beis Shammai's view? Beis Shammai is of the opinion, and this is a principle which comes up not only in the laws of Shabbos, but also in the laws of kosher, and that is something called tata gavar, that the bottom substance overwhelms the top substance. And therefore Beis Shammai says, if the bottom substance is cold, then when you pour hot water into cold water, that's fine, because the bottom substance overwhelms the top substance, and by definition, he's not so you don't put a thermometer in here. By definition, it's going to be cooled off and therefore not heating, right? Whereas he holds if I have hot water on the bottom, by definition, the hot water is going to overwhelm the top substance. You're pouring the cold water into it, and therefore by definition, it is going to be heating it up, and therefore going to be Asur on Shabbos. Again, he's saying, I'm not worried about putting a thermometer in there. By definition, when two substances meet each other, the bottom one is always going to overwhelm the top one, and therefore it's going to be permitted to put hot water into cold water, because then the cold water completely cools it off. But if you're pouring cold water into hot water, it's forbidden because the hot water is going to heat up the top, and therefore Asur. Yes.
So you can't put like an ice cube in chicken soup?
You would absolutely not be allowed to put an ice cube into chicken soup, according to Beis Shammai. According to Beis Shammai. Let's see. Yeah.
There's no volume.
That's another good example.
That they give between these, right? It could be a small amount.
He's not distinguishing. Yeah.
Okay.
According to Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai is not distinguishing. Right. Beis Hillel disagrees. Bein chamin leso chatzonin, uvein sonin leso chamayim, avachamin mutter. Beis Hillel says you're allowed to put hot water into cold water. Okay, so let's say you had, you have some cold water on the bottom and you pour hot water into it, or cold water into hot water. Both those things are allowed. Okay, but medvar murim, when is this so that you're allowed to do this? Because into a cup. Aval bambati, but if it's into a bathtub, okay, a large collection of hot water, then you're allowed to put hot water into cold water and not cold water into hot water. Okay, so let's unpack Beis Hillel for a second. Beis Hillel is saying like this: if it's a large amount of water, then you are not allowed to pour cold. You're not allowed to pour cold water into hot water. So again, let's say you have a huge tub filled with hot water. I'm going to assume it's a Kli Rishon tub, okay, which is not so common for us. But you have a big amount of hot water. There, Beis Hillel will say you're not allowed to pour cold water into that hot water. Okay, so I can't think of a practical example for us. I don't know, you go down, I don't know, whatever, fine. You have a big collection of hot water, which was a Kli Rishon, which was heated up into that Kli Rishon, then you're not allowed to pour cold water into it. But he says if it's not a Kli Rishon, if it's a cup, okay, then you're allowed to pour cold water into hot water into cold water. Okay, so the example of chicken soup. Okay, so you have young children, and whenever we serve them chicken soup, you're pouring it into the way they don't want it. They can't have it if it's just straight off. They can't have just chicken soup on its own. So they'll typically put ice cubes into the chicken soup, right? I don't know. That's what we do. I guess I'm not the only one. And therefore, so you're allowed to put ice cubes into that hot water. That's fine according to Beis Hillel because that is a cup or a bowl. Now, what is it about a bowl that's different than a tub? So the way that Rashi explains it is that a cup is by definition, or we are going to understand a cup to be a klisheni. So meaning, it wasn't just, let's go back to our chicken soup. It's not the bowl, the pot of soup itself. It's that you took a ladle and put it into a klisheni, and it's small. And therefore, by definition, he's saying, the way Rashi understands that by definition, since it's small, it's understood, assumed that whenever I'm going to be mixing something together in that smaller thing, I never want it to be piping hot. Almost like in my mind, I don't care for it to be piping hot, and therefore, when I'm mixing these substances, presumably, I'm not looking to make something piping hot. Whether I'm pouring hot into cold, cold into hot, I'm looking to do something not piping hot, and therefore it's going to be permitted. Okay? And therefore it's going to be permitted to make any type of mix into a smaller thing. So again, Beis Hillel says, in a smaller klisheni, like a cup size or bowl size klisheni, hot into cold, cold into hot, it's going to be permitted. Okay? But something large like a tub, I'm not allowed to pour cold water into hot water, but I'm allowed to pour hot water into cold water. Okay? Now, obviously, there's a big gap between a tub and a cup. Right? There are things like a pot, right? Like something which is like in between size, like your chicken soup, that came off the fire or whatever, like something like a pot size, no one has discussed. So we're talking about tub, you can't pour cold into hot. Cup, you can pour cold into hot. He hasn't told us what to do something in the middle, and that's what we're going to get into right now. But before, let's finish the Brisa. The Brisa concludes by saying, Rav Shimon ben Menasya oser. Rav Shimon ben Menasya forbids this. Now, it doesn't tell us what the this is or the it is. It just says after we have the machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, it says Rav Shimon ben Menasya forbids it, and then Rav Nachman, who is an Amora, comes along. Rav Nachman, halacha Rav Shimon ben Menasya, the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Menasya. Okay, so we're going to come back and understand this last line of Rav Shimon ben Menasya in a moment, but first we're going to get into something in between a cup and a tub. Everyone still with me? Yeah, right? We've got the gap, fine. So Rav Yosef Lemimr Saf Seifel Harihu Kambate. Rav Yosef assumed that a seifel is like a bucket, okay? That it's like a bathtub. So a bucket, let's assume not a bucket, like a pot, right? Something that is in the in-between size between a cup. He wanted to put it in the category of a bathtub, okay? And therefore saying that even according to Beis Hillel, it would be forbidden to pour cold water into the hot water that's found in a tub. In a bucket or a pot. Yeah? Okay, he wanted to consider a pot or a tub, a small tub like a wash basin. He wanted to compare that to a bathtub. Amalei Abaye. Abaye says to him, no. Tana Rav Chia taught in a brisa, seifel eino kambate, that a bucket is not like a bathtub. In other words, again, so you have this thing in the middle of our continuum. We have cup over here, Beis Hillel saying, no problem, do whatever you want. Tub, you can't pour cold water into hot water. What about a bucket in between? So so Rav Yosef wanted to say it's like a bathtub. We have a brisa saying it's not like a bathtub, meaning it's more like a cup. Fine, and therefore basically understands that it's only the bathtub that you cannot pour cold water into the hot water, but the bucket we're going to compare more to a cup. So meaning, let's say you have a pot of water, let's just make this practical for us. Let's say a person took chicken soup off the fire, and then you poured it into klisheni. Okay, so you're at some whatever, you want to bring the bowl to the table. Yeah, meaning not a bowl, a pot to the table. You want to bring like a fancy pot to the table. It happens like in restaurants a lot, or in not restaurants, like a hotel, right? And so instead, they're not going to serve individually, but oftentimes they'll go ahead and they'll put it into a bowl, right? Or in camp, right? They bring it into a bowl. So in that case, according to what we're concluding right now, is that is like a cup, and therefore, if that's too hot and you want to pour some cold stuff into that bowl, then that's going to be permitted. Okay. Fine, and this, yeah.
It seems like the point with this bucket, but also with the cup, is that you're doing it for the purpose of eating it, as opposed to something else, right? That seems to be the distinguishing. Because if you put it into a big tub, you're not going to be consuming that, so you're not doing it.
And therefore what? And therefore,
I don't know. It just seems like it's more of the heating versus not heating. It's more of you can do this because you're going to be eating it. It has more to do, we get into that category of certain, you can't do something to use after Shabbos, but you can do it if you're going to be, for immediate use, whether that's...
Right, that's not a real heter, though, in Shabbos. I mean, my intention of eating it versus not eating would not be enough of a reason to say it's allowed. Not so much my intention, and not so much like why I'm doing it. Where I would agree partially is that Rashi does seem to say that it's not just that it's a klisheni, it's also the fact that presumably I don't want it so hot, and therefore I'm not going to make it so hot. But we'll see. That's not ultimately that far is going to fall by the wayside. But it's not because I want to eat it, therefore it's allowed. It's more since I don't want it so hot, I'm going to make sure not to make it so hot. You know what I'm saying? Like, in other words, ochel nefesh is a principle in Hilchos Yom Tov. It's not a principle in Hilchos Shabbos. Like that would not be enough of a reason. Okay.
We're saying it has to be Yatzalas at any point. You can't if it's boiling, even if it's in a cliche, you can't.
No, that's what we're coming out saying even if it's Yatzolenes, right? And this is the novelty over here. And basically, and this is right. This is not right. So let's spell this out a little bit more. And that is that in a cliche, if you had a thermometer in there, you can't use a thermometer on Shabbos, but or on Yom Tov, by the way. But what's it called? But I had an interesting question actually. Shaila came up on you can't measure on Yom Tov unless for a mitzvah, right? So you could use those really annoying like thing, the measuring for Pesach, but you're not allowed to measure. Someone asked me the other day, a non-digital thermometer for their meat on Yom Tov, can that be done? So normally for things for Yom Tov, there's questions like what category yes, what category no. Bottom line, it seems like it still would be forbidden. The only whatever. Bottom line is you can't use measuring cups and stuff on Yom Tov unless like it's an absolute like you cannot eat it without it. So for example, for spices, you would be allowed to use like measuring scoops on Yom Tov because like having the exact amount is necessary. The question is it so critical for your meats like to have a thermometer that it would therefore be allowed on Yom Tov or not? Anyone here use those? I don't even have those thermometers. Yeah. Sorry? For turkey it would be. Okay, so I don't know. I'm not, okay, I get, yeah. Okay, bottom line, it doesn't, I don't know. It's a fair question. I think as we become more and more like, I don't know what the word is, but like foodies, like it might come to a point where like this becomes like the standard, but like, I don't know, at this point, it's hard to imagine that we could. Okay, that was a tangent. Okay, fine. So we're now here, let's get back to Rav Yosef, okay? Because it's going to bring us on to like a whole what if, like a whole theoretical discussion, okay? So hold on tight. So let's read it again. So Rav Yosef Meimar, oh, sorry. I went on tangent. Back to Ross's point. In other words, in a cliche, I went ahead. I have chicken soup. Okay, so it's hot. It's really hot, and I took it off the fire. I took a pot off the fire and I poured it into. Or now the trendy thing in the hotels now. I just saw this twice actually. Is that they go ahead and they'll take a pitcher. They'll take like a kettle. Right? They'll take a kettle and they'll kind of like take a kettle filled with chicken soup, and that's easier for the waiters to pour it that way. It's very smart. Although you really have to think twice now about every time you make a coffee anywhere, because no, seriously, it's a real shiloh now because basically what they do now is they'll take a kettle like a handheld kettle. Is that the word? Yeah, like a handheld kettle, and they'll dip it into their chicken soup, right? Yeah, it's great, but it's easy for them to now go around the table and they'll pour it using that kettle. But now, the next day, they're serving coffee, and you think it's just hot water, because all they use is hot water in there, right? No, they just use chicken soup there, and you're going to mix that with your milk. It's a little scary now. Our assumption that our coffees are parv are not whatever. I don't know. I'm not poskening, but it's definitely a scary thing. Okay. Bottom line is. Sorry, I'm so tired. I'm sorry. So what's it called? So the bottom line is that pitcher or that cliche of chicken soup is boiling. But according to Beis Hillel, right, where we're standing right now, we're saying that a bowl, even if it's larger than a cup, is a klisheni. So to Ross' point, it's yatz lettuce. I put a single ice cube into there. It's boiling. I pour a little cold water. It's boiling. No problem. Klisheni, by definition, it's not bishul anymore, and therefore there'd be no problem. Okay, so that's the practical halacha l'maisa. I'd be allowed anything in a klisheni. Can I add the ice cubes? Let's say only I put one ice cube in, right? Do I have to put enough ice cubes that's going to cool it off that it's not going to be as? No. The point is I can put one ice cube in. I can put a drop of water in, and it's still boiling hot. It's 100% mutter because it's a klisheni. That's where we're landing right now. But now we're going to go on this what if. Okay, so meaning so again, Rav Yosef initially thought that a small pot, a pitcher, or whatever, anything like that, not a cup, is going to be like a bathtub, and therefore usher. So now the Gemara is going to question his assumption. Again, we ultimately rejected that. We said that the bowl, the big bowl, the pot, and the pitcher, they're really like a cup. But according to what he thought, that they were actually more like a bathtub, the Gemara now asks the following question. That we initially thought, that the Rav Yosef thought that a bowl, a big bowl, is going to be, a pot is going to be like a bathtub. And we said the halacha is like Rav Shimon. Okay, so that would mean if the halacha is like Rav Shimon, right, who says it's usher, right? Again, remember the brayse above? We had Beis Hillel saying you pour hot water into cold water, right? But then Rav Shimon Nasir came along and said it's usher. So if it's usher, what does that mean? That means I can't pour hot bath water into a tub of cold water. It would seem if Rav Shimon Nasir says it is forbidden, it seems like he's going on what Beis Hillel just said, and he's saying that you just said, that you're allowed to pour hot water into cold water, it's not true, it's usher. So ela b'Shabbos rechitza b'chama leika. That would mean that there's no possibility of ever heating up, warming hot water on Shabbos. In other words, if Beis Hillel just said, I'm allowed to pour hot bath water into a tub of cold water, okay, and Rav Shimon ben Manasseh says, I can't do that. So then how, according to Rav Shimon ben Manasseh, who were saying that halacha is like, can I ever go ahead and get warm water on Shabbos? Now, why do we assume that you must be able to get warm water on Shabbos? Because we had a brisa earlier which told us that on Shabbos, you are allowed to use hot water to heat up that was heated up before Shabbos, to warm your hands, feet, and face. Right? So there has to be some way that can be done. We're not willing to assume I'm going to take boiling hot water, because if I'm warming my face and hands, I'm not going to take water straight off the fire and use that. Can't be. Right? So it must be, there's some way to mix hot water and cold water. There must be some way to warm up hot water and cold water. Right? The question is, in what way? Because Rav Shimon ben Manasseh just said it's forbidden. We're not going to assume if I'm heating up hot water and cold water, I'm going to do so in a little cup. That can't be, because no one's going to be like dipping their hands into a cup. There has to be something a little bit larger. We're able to mix hot water and cold water, right? And if Rav Shimon ben Manasseh is coming along and saying it's usher to do so not only in a tub, but also now we're saying in a pot, what's the application? Okay? So says the Gemara, Misar Rav Shimon Seifa Kai. No, you made a mistake. Rav Shimon ben Manasseh is not going on the last case. A Reisha Kai. He's saying like this. This is how we're supposed to understand Rav Shimon ben Manasseh. Beis Hillel comes along and allows hot water into cold water into hot water. Rav Shimon ben Manasseh oser tzon l'so chamin, and Rav Shimon ben Manasseh going on the Reisha, saying that I can't pour cold water into a cup of hot water. Rav Shimon ben Manasseh basically saying I can't use a kli sheni. But when it comes to pouring hot water into a tub of cold water, whether it's a tub or whether it's now a bowl as well, there Rav Shimon ben Manasseh would not have any issue with Beis Hillel. In other words, initially we thought Rav Shimon ben Manasseh was coming and being more strict than Beis Hillel on the Seifa, where Beis Hillel was saying that I'm allowed to pour hot water into a tub of cold water. And now we're saying, based on Rav Yosef's assumption, not just a tub, but also a big bowl, also a pot. And Rav Shimon ben Manasseh was saying, no, you can't do that. And now we're saying, no, that Rav Shimon ben Manasseh would not have any issue. What Rav Shimon ben Manasseh was having issue with was in the Reisha, where Beis Hillel allowed pouring cold water into hot water into a cup. That's what he forbade. Okay? And the Gemara says, wait a second, if that's the case, that means Rav Shimon ben Manasseh is actually holding like Beis Shammai. How would that make sense? Are we going to say that Rav Shimon ben Manasseh, again, in the Reisha, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai are arguing about pouring hot water into cold water, cold water into hot water in a cup. And what would come out is Rav Shimon ben Manasseh is arguing with Beis Hillel and going like Beis Shammai. That would make no sense. We would say halacha is like, and Rav Nachman came along and said that halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Manasseh, which means halacha is like Beis Shammai. So no, that can't be. Hachi kamar, this is what it means. Lo nechlu Beis Shammai Hillel b'davar zeh. What Rav Shimon ben Manasseh is coming along to say is that that he was arguing that even Beis Hillel would say you can't pour cold water into a cup of hot water. In other words, what's happening over here is Rav Shimon ben Manasseh is coming along and arguing with the way that we understood our Mishnah, with the way we understood Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. In other words, Beis Shammai was saying you are not allowed to pour cold water into hot water in a kli sheni. Beis Hillel, in our version, and the way we're reading it right now, is saying you are allowed to, so it's a kli sheni. And Rav Shimon ben Manasseh is saying no, even Beis Hillel says you can't pour cold water into a hot water. In other words, according to the way we're reading it right now, is Beis Hillel would, and the halacha would be that Rav Shimon ben Manasseh is saying that Beis Hillel would not allow you to put your ice cubes into your hot water. In other words, Rav Shimon ben Manasseh is coming along and saying that this is never machlokas. Even Beis Hillel would agree that I can't pour some cold water or ice cubes into hot water. So if I had a tea, I couldn't pour a little cold water. If I had chicken soup, I wouldn't be able to put an ice cube into it. Okay, that's how we would have learned it. But Rav Shimon ben Manasseh would agree that if I'm pouring hot water into a thing of cold water, that he would agree is allowed, and that's how you get warm water on Shabbos. Now, halacha lamaisa, this is not the right way to read it, and therefore, again, kli sheni would be permitted. This is all on a theoretical. Okay, so if you didn't follow it, it was the theoretical. Now let's just finish the Gemara. Rav Huna Berei to Rav Yeshua. Chazina leila Rava de lo kapit amana. I saw Rava not being careful. In other words, having no issue with pouring cold water into a kli sheni of hot water. Where did Rava get this from? From the fact that it said that a person, that we had a brisa that said a person's allowed to put a flask of cold water into a bucket of hot water. Bein chamen sonin uvein sonin mayim. Chamen, whether it was hot water into cold water or cold water into hot water. So that brisa clearly allows a person putting cold water into a basin of hot water. So you see a klisheni, which is again the way we rule, you're allowed to put a cold item into hot water. So now the Gemara points out that proof is not so strong. Amalei Rav Huna Rav Ashi Dilma Shani Hasam Nemifsa Kli. What did the brisa say? The brisa said Nosam Adam Kiton Shalmayim. It said you're allowed to put a flask of water into hot water. So there, meaning the example, a practical example of this would be this comes up a lot, is you have a baby bottle that you took out of the freezer, right? So it's, a person froze the milk or whatever it is, and they have ice cold or whatever, they just have some cold drink that they want to give their child, and it's very cold, and it's an infant, and it's too cold for the infant, so what do? You take the bottle and you put it into a klisheni. What's different about that's not the same as pouring? You're not mixing them, right? So the Gemara says, how could you bring a proof from a case from putting a ketone is a flask, a bucket, like a bottle? There's a wall. So the Gemara says, no, Amrlei, no. Yeah, it's true. That's your version, but Ma'ara Itmar. The Brisa, the version, it doesn't say they put the flask, but rather they said they poured a flask. In other words, don't think it means you could put the flask of cold water into hot water, but rather means you could pour the substance there into it. Okay? Ma'ara Adam Kiton Shamayim L'Sok Siv Shamayim. You're allowed to pour a flask of water, of cold water, into a wash basin of hot water, whether it's hot water into cold water into hot water, and therefore we see that Rava rules this way. And again, so for the last time for today, that is the halacha. The halacha, practically speaking, is as long as it's klisheni. So again, practical examples, yes, you certainly are allowed. For sure you're allowed to go ahead and you have a baby bottle and it's too cold for the baby. You're allowed to put the bottle itself into hot water. There for sure, because there you have the walls of the bottle actually, so it's a little bit not as getting as hot. But you're not only that you're allowed to do, but again, some other practical examples, you have a tea, and the tea's too hot, but it's a klisheni. At that point, it should be a klishish if you made a tea properly, which we're going to get to tomorrow. Then you are allowed to go ahead and drop a thing of ice, or you're allowed to go ahead and put some cold water into it, or you have chicken soup. You're allowed to go ahead and put the ice cubes. What you should not be doing, by the way, now that I'm just thinking about this, is put the ice cubes first, because then it's not yet a klisheni. In other words, you want to first pour the chicken soup in, and then it's a klisheni, right? Or similarly, if you want to make a tea, so you don't put the cold water first, because then when you're pouring it in, it's irui from a kli rishon, let's say, be more problematic. You want it to be a full-fledged klisheni, right? So you put the hot water into a klisheni, and then once it's in a klisheni, you're allowed to add cold water, even though it's going to be, you put your finger in there, it's boiling. Doesn't matter, it's fine, it's klisheni, and that's the way we rule like Rava, and therefore it is permitted. Have a great day. Chodesh Tov Chodesh. Not making a tea. Sorry, just want to be for confusion. You cannot make a tea in a klisheni. I'm just saying chicken soup, which is a klisheni. That you're allowed to do. So if you have a chicken soup in a klisheni, you cannot make a tea in a klisheni. But sorry, go ahead.
So if you're making iced coffee, you can't put the ice in.